Is it first desire and then dream, or first dream and then desire? Only Macbeth and Lennon know, and I knew it, when life, timeless, slashed me apart. Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I'm talking about something very exciting because this was put on my radar earlier in 2020 when I was doing my read through of Roberto Bollano's 2666. I was reading his nonfiction, his essays, articles, and so on in between parentheses. And he talked very interestingly about an Argentine writer, Osvaldo Lamborghini, that really piqued my interest. But nothing of Lamborghini's except a handful of poems was available in English until now. Thanks to Sublunary editions out of Seattle, Washington, we now have two short stories of Lamborghinis in English for the first time. The translator is Jessica Sequeira, and her translator's note at the end, her translator's notes, but then also her sort of afterword to really serve to illuminate both how difficult it is to translate Lamborghini and also does a lot to highlight why this is such an exciting moment for people who cannot read the Spanish original but can read English, why this is such an exciting time to have these stories. I think the best way that the translator sums up Lamborghini is in this sentence from her note at the end. It says, "A beast that invites speculation but eludes touch." My own initial reactions, I sat down and read through these two stories on a Friday night and then turned around the next night on Saturday and read through them again. And really, the way they're written, the first thing you'll read about and hear about with Lamborghini is how difficult it is to describe exactly what's going on, what it is he's doing. He mixes so many different things together. And so anyway, my initial impressions was it has the feel sometimes of automatic writing, sort of like what William S. Burroughs made popular, stemming out of Freud's psychoanalysis and the use of just sitting down and doing automatic writing. Kerouac and some of the beats also took this in different directions, but Lamborghini definitely has his own version of what can feel like automatic writing. Prose poetry mixed with stage drama, talking with multiple voices, sometimes within the same sentence, peculiar syntax that will remind you of Arno Schmidt, maybe not quite to the level of where Schmidt takes the syntax and punctuation, but definitely tending toward that, which was something very novel, especially in the time and the milieu that he's writing, which is he's in the 60s and 70s avant-garde movement, but he's also appropriating a popular genre and a popular symbol in Argentina and other places nearby of the gaucho, which is probably best described for English readers and the American mind as something akin to the American cowboy. So it's this rough and tough figure who's sort of an outlaw, but also very noble and revered. At times it reminds me of Mallarmé and other symbolist poets. And also, just for English readers who may be acquainted with these figures, I've talked about some of them on this channel and reviewed some of their works, but there's something of Jason Schwartz in there. There's something of Diane Williams, Gertrude Stein. And then now I haven't read this author yet, but there's a burgeoning sort of renaissance of Chandler Brossard on the horizon. Books of his are being reissued by Corona Samizdat, a small press in Slovenia that you'll want to check out. But there's this sexualization of political trauma and radicalism that, just from what I've heard about Brossard, there may be some similarities in there. Lamborghini was a mentor to Cesar Aira, which is a very popular writer, and Aira he has written a beautiful introduction. It wasn't written for the Sublunary edition, but it's in the Sublunary paperback. Cesar Aira is definitely really taken by Lamborghini and his intelligence and what he's doing in his writing. And the introduction serves as a beautiful foundation for then approaching Lamborghini's text for the first time. But I want to back up for a second and just read what it is that Roberto Bollano wrote about Lamborghini. It was the first contact I had with Lamborghini. The third lineage in play in contemporary or post-Borgesian Argentine literature is the one that begins with Osvaldo Lamborghini. This is the secret current. It's as secret as the life of Lamborghini, who died in Barcelona in 1985, if I'm not mistaken, and who left as literary executor his most beloved disciple, Cesar Aira, which is like a rat naming a hungry cat as executor. If Roberto Arlt, who as a writer is the best of the three, is the basement of the house that is Argentine literature, and Soriano is a vase in the guest room, Lamborghini is a little box on a shelf in the basement, a little cardboard box covered in dust. And if you open the box, what you find inside is hell. Forgive me for being so melodramatic. I always have the same problem with Lamborghini. There's no way to describe his work without falling into hyperbole. The word cruelty fits like a glove. Harshness does too, but especially cruelty. The unsuspecting reader may glimpse the sort of sadomasochistic game of writing workshops that charitable souls with pedagogical inclinations organize in insane asylums. Perhaps, but that doesn't go far enough. Lamborghini is always 2 steps ahead of or behind his pursuers. Roberto Bollano also famously talks about how Lamborghini scares him and startles him. It says, "There's no question that Tadis is the most brutal book that I've read in Spanish in this waning century," meaning the 20th century. From Cesar Aira's introduction in this Sublunary Editions paperback, he says, "The first and last question that arises before his Lamborghini's pages, before any of them, is, how can a person write so well?" And Aira talks a lot about how even going through all of Lamborghini's stuff after his death, it is amazing how it's almost as if he barely had to go through different drafts and revisions. It's like it was all there, neatly packaged in his mind, and just sort of flowed out. Aira tells an anecdote about them being in a bookstore and Lamborghini pointing to these huge books, these massive tomes, but then saying, "My work," and he pointed at a few emaciated sheaves of paper, "will consist of 2 or 3 of those, nothing more." And it talks about how Lamborghini, he saw these big books, even Crime and Punishment, as really just in the end yielding up these like a single beautiful sentence. Lamborghini's Argentina is the country of representation. Peronism was the historical emergence of representation. Peronist Argentina is literature, and Lamborghini was a Peronist, and Peronian figures feature in his stories. Eva Peron herself features in stories, and Lamborghini was very much about the working class, hence the elevation of the symbol of the gaucho. Aira says he had read everything, and his intelligence was marvelous, overwhelming. He was venerated by his friends, loved by women, and generally respected as the greatest of Argentine writers. The 2 stories that are included in this collection are The Morning, which was published in 1979, and then another one that just says, "Just write anything," with an exclamation mark. And apparently that was taken from a notebook of his that was labeled 1982 or thereabouts. So the first one it's a really surreal piece, and it blends opera and the gauchesca, which is the gaucho literature. This is the one. It reminded me of Mallarmé, Jason Schwartz, Diane Williams, Gertrude Stein, the automatic writing, the prose poetry, but this intertwining of stage opera, this sort of theater drama and the gaucho tradition is first and foremost. It'll go back and forth between talking about a diva and different stage sets, but then also going to snapping to the desert, sometimes in the same sentence, such as the desert retreat calmed spirits, boredom, hotel life, overture of strings to build a solo, to build brambles. This overture of strings not only builds this solo as in an opera, but brambles gives you that southwest and that desert feel. The narrator suddenly start talking to the prose. Oh, prose, how strange I am to you, and how very black is your ceremony. I loved you, I love you, but I won't love you forever. Once you've left my arm, ingrate, I won't love you anymore. Like the carnation of the air, the pasta of literature, the pasture in flames, irredeemable, fragile cacophonies. When I was a musician, I composed and composed, a few broken notes in the mind. Before composing, I felt a deep one, as deep as the top of water, or the tabula rasa, and seated before the music paper with the fountain pen frozen, or the cigarette end which ardently scorched the mahogany of the piano, the memory, not the remembrance, of a landscape. O lamentable ruins of ill-fated Nicosia, still moist with the blood of your valorous and unfortunate defenders, were you capable? No, because when I was a painter, by contrast, it only required an afternoon full of hot ashes, light whipping. And there's a great translator footnote to that whipping. For me to take up with certainty the paintbrush and stay there until once again the piano, replete with the effects of the wallpapering, resounding, and the music. We get these splits, and this is where we get more into that Schmidt-like syntax that I was talking about, but he splits the word revolution. There's to show, and now formally revolution had the Lucian part of it in parentheses. This time it's split and forked down the middle. There's a footnote where the translator talks about this often pointing to the idea of penetration and penetration directly into the language and into the grammar. It also denotes the feel of a schism. All revolutions are born out of a schism, of course. We've got these portmanteaus, such as diva, molish, again, hearkening back to the themes of opera. Diva, which is mentioned several times in the story, it says, be careful, careful with art, because any day they'll diva molish us like a pair of horned frogs. The second story, again, is taken from one of his notebooks. It's titled Just Write Anything. It's from a notebook dated 1982/83, so it's just a couple years before his death in Barcelona. It's very formally inventive, more so than the first story. Both stories work really well to give you two different sort of feels for his writing. It appropriates a lot of slang, so now we've got a lot of street slang, so we get this high art and low art, mass cult and mid cult melded together. And this is the one that I think probably has the most affinities with someone like Brossard, where it's this sexualization of political trauma and radicalism. Early on, right in the first paragraph, it says, it will be necessary to face the problem of popular language. It's also interesting because there's a narrative that plays out in the bottom portions of the pages, but then also these sort of stage directives and almost like a dramatis personae at the top. We also get this interesting use of inverted parentheses. So instead of encapsulating something with the parentheses, we get them inverted with text in the middle, and he refers to it as a gluteus parenthesis. And so in this way, it suggests that this text is being put in between buttocks. The translator goes on to talk about how in other pieces of his work, he includes footnotes, and sometimes those footnotes have footnotes. And given my proximity to reading this to finishing up Infinite Jest, there's really interesting that he was sort of, the use of footnotes in fiction is not new, of course, but the fact that the footnotes could be really long in Lamborghini, but and then they could have footnotes, really was interesting because David Foster Wallace would of course make this very popular in American literature, but Lamborghini was down there in Argentina doing it a decade or so ahead of time. So again, Lamborghini, my experience, my first ever experience with Lamborghini has been a solid one. I've really enjoyed it. I've read the stories 3 times now. They're very short. And each time I'm seeing more. There's so much compressed in there. And there's just an excitement and an energy to it. Again, this is coming out of a movement called the Neo-Barocco or the Neo-Baroque movement. It's combining or Gauchesca tradition with also Lamborghini's obvious concern with language. And all of this blended together with theater in mind and prose and poetry all mixed in together, and then also being formally inventive on the page and to the eyes. So really, this is quite something new. And it just reminds me of someone on the channel not too long ago mentioning the fact that there's so much great literature coming out of Argentina that still has yet to be translated, but is so rich. And so here we're seeing the beginnings of Lamborghini's introduction to the English-speaking world. So thank you to Sublunary Editions, and also thank you to Macondo Melillo for giving me input about his favorite Argentine writer, Osvaldo Lamborghini. I hope you'll check it out and let me know what you think.